Welcome to Crypto Journal. Hit like right now if you want more content like this without promotional interruptions. Drop a comment about what other project you want me to talk about. The comment with the most likes is the one I'll bring you. I read every single one. While the crypto world debates which meme coin will pump next, something extraordinary is happening in complete silence. Zebec Company is systematically acquiring compliance infrastructure, completing audits that most projects ignore, and positioning itself to become the first fully MiCA-compliant payment protocol in Europe. And almost nobody is paying attention. Today, we're exposing Zebec Network's regulatory strategy, why their MiCA pursuit isn't defensive compliance, but offensive market capture, and what happens when they become one of the few blockchain payment systems legally authorized to serve 450 million Europeans under the strictest crypto regulations ever implemented. Let me show you what's actually happening. In September 2025, Zebec completed SC2 Type 2 certification, the security standard required for enterprise financial infrastructure. This isn't a checkbox. SC2 requires independent audits of security controls, data handling, and operational procedures. Most crypto projects can't pass SSE2 because they're not built for institutional compliance. Zebec passed, and they immediately announced they're pursuing European Union MiCA approval with a target completion by year-end 2025, alongside ISO 27001 certification, the global standard for information security management systems. This isn't a single compliance effort. This is a coordinated regulatory infrastructure build that positions Zebec as enterprise-grade financial infrastructure. But here's what changes everything. In June 2025, Zebec acquired Gatenox, a compliance and identity platform, bringing native KYC, KYB, and AML tools directly into their Web3 payment stack. Neil Padier, Zebec's head of mergers and acquisitions, explicitly stated, regulation is no longer optional. It's infrastructure. With Gatenox, we're embedding compliance into the foundation of programmable finance, making Zebec faster, safer, and ready for institutional scale. This isn't preparing for regulation. This is weaponizing regulation as competitive advantage. When MiCA becomes enforceable in 2025, most crypto payment platforms operating in Europe will face a choice: spend millions building compliance infrastructure from scratch, exit European markets entirely, or partner with platforms that already have MiCA compliance. Zebec is positioning to be that platform. And here's why this matters more than anyone realizes. MiCA isn't just European regulation. It's the template for global crypto regulation. When the United States, Asia, and other jurisdictions create their frameworks, they'll reference MiCA standards. Being first to MiCA compliance means being positioned for global regulatory alignment. Now let's talk about what MiCA actually requires and why most projects can't meet these standards. The markets in crypto assets regulation mandates stablecoin issuers and crypto service providers meet capital requirements, conduct regular audits, implement consumer protections, and maintain reserves that back digital assets. But for payment protocols like Zebec, MiCA requires something even more complex: real-time transaction monitoring, automated compliance reporting, and embedded KYC at the protocol level. This is exactly what Gatenox provides. The company's founders previously built K, the largest mobile payment platform in Eastern Europe, and Coinfirm, a blockchain compliance solution. They have direct experience building payment infrastructure that operates under European financial regulations. When Zebec acquired Gatenox, they didn't just buy compliance software. They acquired regulatory expertise and proven technology from people who've successfully navigated European financial authorities. According to Zebec's announcement, Gatenox is a direct competitor to SumSub, one of the leading third-party compliance providers in crypto. But here's the strategic advantage. By bringing compliance in-house rather than relying on third parties, Zebec controls their entire compliance stack. No external dependencies, no third-party risk, no waiting for external providers to implement updates when regulations change. This is infrastructure designed to scale under the most stringent regulatory environments. And when MiCA compliance becomes mandatory, Zebec won't need to retrofit their system. They've built compliance at the protocol level from the beginning. Now let's talk about the silent regulatory takeover that's happening. MCA creates massive barriers to entry for new competitors in European crypto markets. Projects that haven't invested in compliance infrastructure won't be able to serve European customers. Existing platforms will need to spend millions on compliance retrofits or exit the market entirely. But platforms that achieve MCA compliance early gain first mover advantage in a 450 million person market that suddenly has clear regulatory frameworks. European institutions that couldn't adopt crypto payment infrastructure due to regulatory uncertainty now have a legal pathway. And they'll choose platforms that are MICA compliant, SSE2 certified, and ISO 27001 validated. Zebec is positioning to be one of maybe 5 to 10 platforms globally that can claim this compliance trifecta. When European banks need blockchain payment infrastructure for real-time payroll, when corporations need compliant stablecoin settlement, when fintech companies need regulatory-approved streaming payments, they'll have limited options. And Zebec will be among them. Here's where the secret plan becomes visible. Zebec isn't just pursuing compliance for European markets. They're building the compliance infrastructure that will become mandatory globally. In June 2025, they announced they're also pursuing FCA registration with the United Kingdom's Financial Conduct Authority. The UK isn't covered by MCA post-Brexit, but the FCA has similar requirements focused on consumer protection, anti-money laundering, and operational resilience. By simultaneously pursuing MICA and FCA approval, Zebec is positioning for both the European Union's 450 million people and the UK's 67 million people. A combined market of over 500 million users under some of the world's strictest financial regulations. When they achieve these approvals, they'll be among the only blockchain payment platforms legally authorized to serve these markets. But here's what nobody's discussing. The United States is watching MICA implementation closely. The Genius Act passed in July 2025, creating the first federal framework for stablecoins with full reserve backing and monthly reporting requirements. The Clarity Act is advancing to define market structure for crypto assets. These US frameworks reference similar standards to MICA: consumer protection, anti-money laundering, operational resilience, and reserve transparency. When Zebec achieves MCA compliance, they'll be pre-positioned for US regulatory frameworks. The compliance infrastructure they're building for Europe will apply to US markets with minimal adaptation. This isn't European compliance. This is global regulatory positioning disguised as European compliance. Now let's talk about what happens after MICA approval. First, institutional partnerships that were impossible before become possible immediately. European banks can't partner with non-compliant crypto platforms, but MICA-compliant platforms become viable infrastructure partners. Zebec's real-time streaming payroll serving 200+ employees monthly with $300 million in annual volume suddenly becomes accessible to European corporations that need modern payment infrastructure. Second, exchange listings that were restricted become available. Major European exchanges must comply with MICA by only listing compliant assets and providing services through compliant platforms. Non-compliant projects get delisted. MICA-compliant projects gain liquidity access they didn't have before. ZBCN could see European exchange listings that dramatically increase accessibility. Third, institutional investment vehicles become feasible. European asset managers can offer products based on non-compliant crypto infrastructure, but MICA-compliant platforms enable regulated investment products, ETPs, and structured products. When Zebec achieves MCA compliance, European institutions can build products around ZBCN that weren't legally possible before. Fourth, government and institutional pilot programs become accessible. The European Commission is actively exploring blockchain for public services, cross-border payments, and digital identity. These pilots require MICA-compliant infrastructure. Non-compliant platforms can't participate. MICA-compliant platforms become the default options for European institutional blockchain initiatives. This is market capture through regulatory compliance. While competitors chase retail users with marketing campaigns, Zebec is quietly building infrastructure that will be required by European law. When enforcement begins, Zebec isn't scrambling to comply. They're already compliant, serving institutional clients who had no other options. Here's the competitive moat this creates. Compliance infrastructure is expensive and time-consuming to build. SC2 audits cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and take months. MCA compliance requires legal teams, compliance officers, and technical infrastructure that most projects can't afford. ISO 27001 certification requires comprehensive information security management systems that take years to implement properly. Zebec has invested millions and multiple years building this infrastructure. New competitors can't replicate this overnight. By the time competitors recognize that regulatory compliance is competitive advantage, Zebec will have multi-year head starts and established relationships with European institutions that need compliant infrastructure partners. Now let's address why this has gone unnoticed. Regulatory compliance isn't sexy. It doesn't generate viral marketing campaigns. It doesn't create memes. Retail traders don't care about SC2 audits or MICA frameworks. They care about price action and hype narratives. But institutions care deeply about regulatory compliance. Banks can't partner with non-compliant platforms regardless of technology quality. Asset managers can't offer products based on non-compliant infrastructure regardless of potential returns. Corporations can't adopt payment systems that create regulatory risk regardless of cost savings. Regulatory compliance is the filter that determines which blockchain projects can serve institutional markets. And Zebec is building that compliance infrastructure while competitors chase retail attention. This is silent positioning that retail doesn't see until institutional adoption becomes obvious and price discovery follows. Here's the technical analysis context. ZBCN printed a bullish flag pattern in early October 2025 with a 66% upside target near $0.00710. The MCD crossed bullish for the first time since early 2024. Trading volume exceeded 228 million ZBCN on major exchanges. These technical signals suggest institutional accumulation is beginning before MICA approval is finalized. When smart money positions before catalysts, they don't wait for announcements. They accumulate quietly while retail is distracted. By the time MICA approval is officially announced and institutional partnerships begin, institutional capital has already positioned. Retail only sees the price movement and wonders what happened. Let me be crystal clear about what we're not saying. We're not saying MICA approval is guaranteed. We're not saying institutional partnerships will definitely materialize. We're not saying ZBCN will hit specific price targets. We're not giving financial advice. Regulatory processes are unpredictable. Institutional adoption takes time, and market conditions can change. What we are saying, follow the regulatory positioning. Zebec completed SSC2. They acquired GateKnox for native compliance. They're pursuing MICA and ISO 27001. They're targeting FCA registration. This coordinated compliance infrastructure build suggests strategic positioning for regulatory-driven market capture in European and global markets. When MICA becomes enforceable and European institutions need compliant blockchain payment infrastructure, they'll have limited options. Platforms that invested in compliance early will capture institutional demand. Platforms that ignored compliance will be excluded from European markets entirely. And Zebec has positioned to be among the few compliant options available. The current price of ZBCN doesn't reflect this regulatory positioning yet. With 100 billion total supply and deflationary tokenomics through transaction fee burns, the market is valuing Zebec based on current metrics rather than post-MICA institutional access. But when European banks announce partnerships, when institutional products launch, when government pilots select compliant infrastructure, price discovery accelerates to reflect new reality. This is how institutional adoption actually happens. Not through viral marketing, but through regulatory compliance that creates access to markets competitors can't serve. Not through hype narratives, but through operational infrastructure that meets institutional requirements. Not through speculation, but through strategic positioning years before retail markets recognize the opportunity. Now you understand why Zebec's regulatory strategy isn't defensive compliance, but offensive market capture. They're building infrastructure that will be legally required in Europe's 450 million person market, positioning for similar requirements globally, and creating competitive moats through compliance investments competitors can't quickly replicate. Whether this strategy succeeds depends on MICA approval timing, institutional adoption rates, and competitive responses. But the strategic logic is undeniable. Regulatory compliance is becoming mandatory. Platforms with compliance infrastructure will serve institutional markets. And Zebec has invested more aggressively in this positioning than almost any competitor. If this changed your perspective on regulatory compliance as competitive advantage, smash that like button. Drop a comment with your analysis on whether MCA compliance will become the deciding factor for institutional blockchain adoption in Europe. Tell me which compliance plays you think will dominate as regulations tighten globally. I read every comment. Let's see who's thinking about regulatory infrastructure instead of waiting for announcements. See you in the next one.